everyone, and welcome to Stephanie's Cucina. I'm Stephanie Vanoy, and I'm coming to you from beautiful San Diego, California. It's Appetizer Week for the Real Women of Philadelphia, and I am going to make one of my absolute favorite dishes for you. I'm going to make a spicy Philly tomato bisque that is going to knock your socks off. One of my all-time favorite tomato soups I ran across when I was on vacation in Miami, Florida at a little Italian restaurant, and I got this soup for an appetizer. I never thought I would be able to top that soup until I came up with this recipe, and this is even better. This is awesome, and I can't wait for you to try it. So let's get started. The first thing I'm going to do is make my croutons that I'm going to use to top the soup. So I've preheated my oven to 400 degrees, and I've taken about half of a French baguette and I cut it into little cubes. So I'm going to take a couple tablespoons of olive oil and I'm just going to drizzle it all over the baguette's cubes just to get it good and coated. And then I'm going to take my favorite Romano cheese. You can use Parm, you can really use any cheese that you like. I love Romano because it gives it a nice salty edge. And this particular cheese, I have my mom send me from northern West Virginia where I grew up. It's just my favorite. So I'm just going to take a microplane and I'm going to just grate a nice amount of the Romano all over the croutons. And the microplane's nice because it grates it really fine, and the cheese is going to stick to the croutons really well when you put it in the oven. So here we go. And if you get a little bit over the edges onto the pan, it's okay, because then you'll just have some little crispy cheese bits to put in your soup as well. Okay, so I've got my croutons ready, and I'm just going to put those in the oven. I'm going to check my croutons in about 15 minutes, so I've set the timer there. Okay, so while my croutons are in the oven, I've got about a 3-quart Dutch oven here that I've heated up, and I'm melting butter, 2 tablespoons of butter and a tablespoon of olive oil together. And that's just starting to bubble. I've got it on about a medium heat. I'm going to add about half of a large sweet onion that I've chopped up, just rough chopped. So I'm going to get that in there, and I'm going to add about 1/4 teaspoon of crushed red pepper to give this a little, this is what the spicy in our spicy Philly tomato soup. Putting it in here with the onion just infuses it with the olive oil and the butter and the onion, and it gives it a really good spicy base. So I'm going to let those soften. I just want the onions to soften and kind of turn translucent a little bit before I add my garlic, because I don't want my garlic to burn. Okay, so my onions have been cooking 2 or 3 minutes, and I'm going to add about 4 cloves of garlic that I've minced. You can use a little more, a little less, whatever you like. I like a lot of garlic myself. So I'm going to add in that minced garlic. And I'm just going to cook that until the garlic also starts to soften a little. That's the timer, so that means that my croutons are done. And while that garlic gets going in there, I'm going to pull the croutons out of the oven. Well, those look perfect. And they're not too toasted, but just enough, and the cheese is kind of crisp on top. That is fantastic. Okay, so I've got my garlic. Oh, this smells wonderful. Ugh. I can even smell the hot pepper a little bit. It is out of this world. So for this recipe, I'm using Italian-style whole-peeled tomatoes. I've got 2 28-ounce cans, and I have separated the whole-peeled tomato from the juice, and I reserved the juice because I'm going to use that a little bit later. So now you can see that my onions and my garlic are really bubbling in here, and I'm going to add these tomatoes, and I'm going to let these kind of roast in the pan. Just going to stir that together and kind of press the tomatoes down a little bit. And I'm just going to stir that up and bring that back to a little bubble and let that cook for about 10 minutes to kind of roast those tomatoes. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take the tomato juice that I reserved from the cans, and I'm going to pour that in here. I got that, and I've also got 2 cups of chicken stock. You could also use vegetable stock if you want this to be a vegetarian dish, but I'm going to use this nice chicken stock. So I'm going to add that in, I'm going to stir it all together and bring it back to a boil. Then I'm going to reduce it down to just a medium-low heat, and I'm going to let it simmer for about 20 minutes. So my tomatoes have been simmering for about 20 minutes, and they look wonderful. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add about a cup of fresh basil that I just picked and I chopped up. So I'm going to add that in here. And I'm going to stir that real good, just to let it wilt into it. There we go. That is perfect. Okay, so now I'm going to take my immersion blender and I'm going to puree this until it's a nice smooth consistency. So make sure you submerge it. Okay, so now I've got that pureed. Now, an immersion blender, that's something that I haven't always had in my kitchen, but it is a really indispensable tool. It's great for making soups and stuff like this. If you don't have one, you could use a blender or you could process it through a food mill, but be really careful while the liquid is hot if you do try to use your blender. I definitely have found that these are worth the investment. You can find a nice one just at the department store for even starting around $30. So, I have my soup all blended here, and now for the finishing touch, I'm going to add 4 ounces of Philadelphia cream cheese. And that is going to make this soup just cool and creamy and delicious, and it's going to balance out those tomatoes and the spice really perfectly. There we go. And we're just going to stir that around until it completely melts and the soup becomes just a little pink. So once I get that done, I'm going to add about a teaspoon of sugar to it to also balance out the tomatoes. Now that I've got the sugar and the cream cheese in there and it's stirred really good, I am going to use my immersion blender one more time just to kind of get that all infused. Okay, so I've got my soup in the bowl and I've got some more fresh basil that I went out and got and I just chopped up kind of julienne. So I'm going to put just a little bit of that in there, and I'm going to put some of my cheesy croutons on top. That is just perfect, and now I'm going to try it. I can't wait. This is... oh my goodness. This is out of this world, and those crunchy cheesy croutons just give it an extra element of wow. I really hope you'll try this recipe at home. It's super simple to make and delicious. You'll wow your guests and your family with this recipe. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Stephanie's Cucina for the Real Women of Philadelphia Appetizer Week, and I hope you'll join me again. So until then, ciao!